Hello and welcome to Resilience, the global adaptation podcast, the show where we'll be exploring the best solutions and cutting-edge technologies for adapting to climate change.
From climate-resilient forests to the use of artificial intelligence to the power of storytelling, we're coming to you from the United Nations Environment Programme. I'm Liz Bernhardt.
And I'm Marcus Neild. In our podcast, we'll be talking to the world's greatest adaptation experts, but we'll also be travelling around the world to meet people on the front lines of climate change to hear personal stories of how they've built resilience.
We're really excited to share some incredible climate success stories with you. Join us as we adapt to climate change, one conversation at a time.
Now, these two issues, climate and AI, are exhaustively discussed by governments, by the media, and by leaders here in Davos. And yet, we have not yet an effective global strategy to deal with either. And the reason is simple. Geopolitical divides are preventing us from coming together around global solutions for global challenges.
That was the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres speaking at the Davos conference in 2024. Today we're peering into the future, or at least it used to feel like the future. We are of course talking about artificial intelligence and the role it can play in helping the world build resilience to climate change.
So AI, as most of us probably know by now, is a field of computer science with a plan to create machines that are capable of intelligent behavior. Experts say it'll change our lives in ways that we can't even imagine. How we travel, how we communicate, how doctors diagnose and treat diseases, how we work, and even how we see reality. So Marcus, I have a feeling that in this new world of AI, my fridge might soon be smarter than I am.
And in terms of adapting to climate change, as we'll discuss today, AI could be a game changer, whether it's predicting devastating floods before they happen, optimizing water use in agriculture so not a drop is wasted, crunching unfathomable amounts of data to tell farmers exactly which seed varieties are going to perform well in which conditions, or, as we're seeing in Brazil, combining AI with drones to reforest the landscape 100 times faster than by hand. It sounds like science fiction, but it's not anymore.
And that tremendous power also brings really tough questions. Who's benefiting? Who's being left behind? Can we really trust machines with the fate of our world? Are there hidden consequences? And are we all guilty of getting caught up in the hype? In this episode, we're going to journey from cutting-edge research labs to real-life projects on the ground with two very smart AI experts. Himanshu Gupta is the CEO of ClimateAI, a platform that was recognized by Time magazine in 2022 as one of the best inventions of the year. And Eleonore Fournier-Tombs from the United Nations University is on a mission to ensure that AI serves humanity without leaving anyone behind.
We first start with Himanshu. He tells us about his extraordinary journey growing up in poverty in drought-stricken parts of India to now leading an award-winning AI firm in Silicon Valley. He tells us how his experience shaped his views on climate change and why AI could be a source of solutions, for example, by helping tomato farmers in India increase their yields by a third.
Hi, Himanshu. Welcome to the show. We were really fascinated to learn about your work with ClimateAI and how you use AI to help people adapt to climate change. But before we get into some of that work, we'd love to ask you a bit about your background. You come from a small town in northern India, and you used to have to walk a mile just to get water for your family from the nearest river when drought hit your town. Could you tell us a bit about that struggle for water security and how that might have informed your passion for climate adaptation?
Well, thanks, Liz, for that question. It brings back all those memories. It was a struggle for my mom. I was 6 or 7 years of age. There were 4 of us siblings, and there wasn't a concept of a municipal water supply. So very much we were dependent on when the monsoons arrive and what is the intensity of the monsoons. Every year, if there was delay in the onset of monsoons or disruptions in the actual amount of monsoons, of course, the taps will run dry.
I worked in the field of water, and at one point for myself, I had a moment where I realized, hey, all this work on water, all the impacts that we're seeing, it's actually really kind of all about climate change, right? Underlying many of what we're seeing. Did you have that kind of moment where you went from getting that water, seeing about the monsoons, to wanting to work in climate adaptation?
So two things. One is back when we were kids. Yes, of course, there were all these issues and problems with water security. Back then, we didn't even realize that this is a problem because of climate change. And to be honest, we didn't even have time to complain because we were also busy in surviving for the next day, for the next day, for the next day. It wasn't like I wanted to work in climate change in the undergrad, to be honest. Just like any lower middle class kid, I wanted to work in finance. But recession happened. And as a result, I went to work in this French nuclear energy company, and I was an electrical engineer by training. Along the same time, India was preparing for its 12th five-year plan. So I got to work in Planning Commission of India. During that time frame is when I saw many of the fashion brands approaching us regarding an issue. And that issue was suicides of cotton farmers in the west of India. These farmers will take loans, and as their crops would be decimated because of drought, they would not be able to repay their loans. And because of social taboo and the pressure from the lenders, they will prefer committing suicides. And so that became a big political issue. Along the same time, we saw like many fashion brands approaching us. And they were concerned about this problem, not just because of reputational concerns. They were more concerned about this problem from a reliability of their cotton supply chain. To me, that was that light bulb moment you were talking about, that today it's these fashion brands. Tomorrow, this has to be every company on this planet Earth will have to deal with the reliability of their supply chain with respect to new normal of extreme weather. And if we can help these companies understand and respond to the risk of extreme weather on their operations, extreme and supply chains, at the same time, help climate proof farmers in their supply chains, it will meet the double bottom line objectives.
I mean, I'm absolutely captivated by your story. So yeah, so turning more to the subject of AI, and could we maybe just start with one case study of how AI is being used to help people adapt to climate change?
So if we think about the applications of AI in the field of climate change, we can talk about this within the framework of big data and lack of data. So let me start with lack of data. If we think about predicting the problem of extreme weather, it's a factor of how much resources you put into it. So as an example, in the US government has deployed a lot of resources in developing numerical weather predictions. These are high resolution models run on physical supercomputers, very expensive to run. Now, within that, California has invested even more resources to develop high resolution weather forecasts for California. Now, you take the problem even further. The emerging countries, they even have less advances done in the field of weather forecast. So, is the answer that you're going to invest another $100 millions into creating those numerical high resolution weather forecasting models? The answer is no. So, what we did was we used generative AI technology. You take images from low weather forecasting model, and you use the same technology to generate high resolution images of precipitation, especially for extreme precipitation, which can answer questions like where exactly is the storms occurring, how long will it occur, and so on and so forth. So what we realized is that that technology generated in terms of accuracy was as good as if you were to invest hundreds of millions of dollars in high resolution weather forecasting. The second is around where data is available, right? We call it the big data problem. What farmers need the most right now is access to climate resilient seeds. It takes seed companies almost 10 to 15 years to launch a new seed variety into the market. What the seed companies were realizing that by the time they were to launch seeds into the market, climate has already changed and those seeds are no longer viable. The cost ultimately has to be borne by farmers. Our machine learning approaches, what we said is like, if you want to launch a drought resistant seed for, let's say, Zambia, you don't need to develop a seed from scratch. So what we will do is roll the clock forward for Zambia 10 years down the line. We'll figure out like what are the specific growing conditions in the next 10 years in Zambia in a particular location. Then the machine learning model will help you understand which of your existing seed portfolio can fit into the existing drought resistant traits that are required for Zambia. So we look at the production model of a crop. It's all from soil, its climate, so temperature, water, and so on and so forth. And then figures out like 10 years down the line, where are the similar areas globally which will have a similar climate as Zambia? So if the seed industries have already developed a crop for there or seed for there, they can redeploy it for Zambia straight away. That's one application. The other application could be like if you want to launch a drought resistant cucumber for Zambia, where can you grow it? If not in Zambia, where can you grow those seeds faster? And typically it takes a seed company to figure out this location, like 3 or 4 years to figure out a new location. In fact, we are helping 35% of the seed industry launch these seeds 30% faster and 40% cheaper in the market.
So Himanshu, I understood that you've now used these solutions and you've tested them in different cases, and like you said, have quite high accuracy. I wonder if we can talk a little bit about a sort of specific place where you've implemented these solutions. So I understand that you're helping some farmers in central India. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that.
We do not directly work with farmers. We work with food companies and seed companies, and through them, we work with farmers. Talking about the impact on farmers, I'll talk about tomato farmers in central India. And this is with a major seed company. They wanted to launch drought resistant tomato seeds for India. In this example, it was all about for this location, of course, these are the farmers we want to grow for. We don't want to move. Can you help us identify specific traits we can launch? Typically, global climate models give you information on the broad trends. Those projections in its raw format are not super useful. And in this case, we identified what specific trait of tomato seed that could be launched here. Like, so if droughts are impacting, at what crop stage are they impacting? So we can actually have a seed or trait that can withstand that impact better. We can straight away increase the yields by 30 to 40%. So the same information our model was able to generate on those few locations. We gave it to the seed company, and giving this trait can help them increase yields by 35%. So it's a simple problem, but it's all about going very deep into understanding tomatoes as a crop. My absolute favorite is the concept of adaptation playbooks.
Adaptation playbooks.
Adaptation playbooks, which we have developed with a large food company. We are forecasting risk for crops and its impact on crops as well. But what do we do with this information? So we said, like, we'll work with the agronomist on the ground and taking input from some of the farmers as well as to what are the key management practices that farmers can deploy to help reduce this risk in the long run. So I'll give an example of wheat farmers in North Central India, where we went to the levels of like, okay, this is going to be the impact of climate change on wheat crops in the next 10 years. Where is that impact going to show up? Is it high? Is it because of drought stress? Is it because of heat stress across what stage of the crop? Then we worked with a food company on figuring out the adaptation playbook. This could be about like these set of farmers should be shifting their planting dates by 2 weeks. And these set of farmers should be using this seed variety. So it's very tailored to a specific area and a specific farmer. And now what this food company did was like started conducting trials with those farmers of those wheat varieties. So we are very excited about this concept of adaptation playbooks. This is where we think that if deployed at scale, this could bring the next productivity revolution in agriculture globally.
That's really fascinating. And I love that you've delved into some very specific types of staple crops. What are some other ways that you think AI can help people adapt to climate change?
Yeah, so there are other areas as well. So as an example, think about climate impacts on cities. And how do you develop resilient cities? All the way from designing better drainage systems in flood-prone areas, to having better design of buildings, better material buildings, which can withstand hurricanes. We think digital twin of cities can help quite a bit. Imagine if you were to create a digital twin of the city and can simulate, let's see, what does hurricane do to the city in terms of damage? And then you can also simulate, what if I were to change the design of the building from spherical to conical or whatnot? Let's see, what impact does it have? So instead of so you can actually create a digital lab where you can come up with the right solution, all the way from the right design to the right material for a city to become more resilient.
I can hear that there's tremendous application of AI as a solution for climate change. On the other hand, we also know that AI is extremely energy and, I have to say it, water intensive. So how do you reconcile these two things?
I agree. There's a statistic that if you ask 4 or 5 questions from ChatGPT, the water consumption of that is equivalent to like 1 water bottle, right? So to me, of course, the solution lies in, of course, developing, not everything has to be about large language models. A lot of these small models can also do amazing stuff and cater to the need of like specific use cases. So as an example, one use case we are working on is like, can we develop an AI meteorologist where even think of every farmer, while he or she is plowing their fields, has an AI meteorologist that's giving them insights in their own language, tailored to their own crop. we don't need to throw large language models at every problem. Within that, we have to keep on innovating on how do we reduce the energy consumption for every bit that is being processed.
Amazing. Thank you so much. It's been a really, really interesting topic. Just a final question, really. So, how can our guests follow the work that you're doing? Where would you like to direct people online?
As any entrepreneur in Silicon Valley will tell you, like, please follow us on our website, on our Twitter pages and LinkedIn pages. We will be launching a lot more of our work in emerging countries over the next 2 or 3 years. So your listeners will get to hear about us a lot more.
Thanks, Himanshu. Great to meet you. Really great to talk to you. Thanks.
Likewise.
All right, that was Himanshu Gupta, CEO of ClimateAI, sharing his extraordinary journey from rural India to Silicon Valley. Next up, we're speaking with Eleonore Fournier-Tombs from the UN University. As one of her many roles, Eleanor is the research lead for the UN's High-Level Advisory Board on AI.
Eleanor has worked as a data scientist throughout the UN system. She has a PhD on machine learning topics and is considered a thought leader on how to balance innovation with ethics. Eleanor, thanks so much for coming onto the show.
It's my pleasure. I'm really happy to be here with you today.
So let's start with you and a bit of your background first. So how did you get into AI? Was there a specific moment that triggered this interest?
It's a really good question. After I finished my degree in political science and sustainable development, I started working at the UN, and I did a lot of communications. And at the same time, I realized that I was really drawn towards analysis. I was working with a lot of academics, and the kind of work that they were doing was really interesting. And so I started to explore, what I could do at the intersection of the two. And it ended up being data science, which is a subfield of AI. Over time, AI began to gain even more prominence. And so it wasn't just me working as a data scientist doing predictive analytics, but I began to advise the UN system and member states on how to use it ethically, what are the opportunities, what are the different risks. And now I'm working a lot in the policy space in that domain.
So we're told that one of the benefits of AI is that it can help us adapt to climate change. So could you give us a few different examples?
I think in order to really think about this topic, we have to understand that, of course, as you know, there's different interventions to climate change. You have prevention and mitigation of its impact on vulnerable populations, and then you have adaptation. And so in this question, we're also coming at the sort of last stage of interventions in relation to climate change. But I think in the way that we're going right now with our society, I think we have no choice but to intervene in the three different domains in parallel. And there's so much effort and enthusiasm going around AI development at the moment. And there's a lot of money on artificial intelligence and sustainable development. And so I think it's really important to harness that money and harness that enthusiasm properly and use it for adaptation. And so there's a lot of different ways in which we could benefit from AI tools. One of them, of course, I think it's one of the best known examples, is the energy consumption example. So as the climate changes, the planet becomes more inhospitable. It gets a lot hotter. And so what we are seeing is this kind of feedback loop where much more energy is used to cool down people's homes and workplaces and all kinds of systems like that. And AI systems can be used to predict efficient energy consumption and so reduce waste. So that's the whole benefit of having smart systems, is that they're responsive to need. And so you can reduce the amount of energy that you're using to cool down systems because you're predicting more accurately what's going to be needed. The advantage with using AI for energy consumption reduction is also that it will reduce carbon emissions.
So am I right in saying that the power there is that it's able to take huge amounts of data, and then so it's sort of the analytical ability of AI that's the real benefit? Is that right?
Yeah, the analytical power of AI really can allow to predict when energy systems are going to need to be used. So for example, you're going to be using your AC, you need the temperature to be at a certain level. If you have a more adaptive system that can predict your usage, It can turn on and off when people are out of the building. When we use energy without these kinds of tools, we can end up wasting a lot. Another way is something that's used a lot at the UN, and it's response to either humanitarian needs or development needs. And this really comes again in the predictive analytics realm, analyzing basically the needs and the movements of different populations. So we know that climate change is going to impact different populations very unevenly. And there's parts of the world right now where you see an increase already in vulnerability and poverty and climate related migration. And so throughout the UN here and there, and in other organizations too, you're starting to see the use of AI as a predictive tool to be able to anticipate where people are going to go and sort of prepare to receive them and to support them.
Wait, okay, so it can predict human migration patterns that, like future migration patterns as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of ways in which understanding the different patterns and drivers of migration can certainly help to predict, especially when people are going to arrive to certain camps, for example, or what will be the trigger for people to start moving. With basically AI machine learning tools, you have access to a higher computational power, you can use much more data and so on. And so there's a tendency of higher accuracy in these models, and they can be more responsive.
And is it the case that they can look at more different variables as well? So it's not just the amount of data, but the amount of actual variables. So kind of superimposing the climate variables along with the human vulnerability variables. And is that right?
Yeah, especially I think when the variables are not known. My experience in doing predictive work around migration is that often the trigger is, they're not that many. It's not that for one person or one family to move, to decide to uproot their family and to leave their home and to go somewhere. There's not going to be 1,000 different reasons why they do that. There's one thing or two things that happened. And often it'll be those kinds of the same thing for everybody in that community. The thing is that you don't always know ahead of time how people are going to act. And so there's also an analytical capability with AI that, yes, you can look at maybe 1,000 or 2,000 different indicators, and you can learn from that. And based on that, you can understand what these drivers of migration could have been. It allows you not only to prepare humanitarian aid, but also to intervene ahead of time so that they don't have to move. From a humanitarian perspective, it's really important because there's been for so many years a kind of reactive methodology with humanitarian action where it happens after the fact. And in the last few years, you've seen a lot of movement towards this idea of anticipatory action and early warning. And in that domain, AI has been really instrumental because it's allowed for predictions. And so having the data to back it helps organizations gather the resources. It helps them to allocate appropriately, if we have limited resources, to the right kinds of populations that might be most vulnerable.
And I'm just curious to know, what stage of the development is this? So it makes me think a lot about the Sahel and obviously the migration that's happening there. You have this horrible, vicious circle of desertification mixed with migration. Is that the kind of context in which this could be used, and is it already being used?
So there's data science programs and predictive analytics programs throughout humanitarian development sector, including at the UN. If you start looking at things like innovation labs or data centers or things like that, they're all doing basically this kind of work in the humanitarian space. Still, these are very lean operations, and they don't have a lot of computational resources. And they're doing a lot, with their laptops and their small amount of resources. That being said, it's a tool. And so it's important to make the best use of these tools that we can while we also work on the underlying issues.
Now, experts are warning us that AI really must be made affordable and accessible for those low-income nations as well as the sort of richer nations. So how do we ensure that AI and these tools don't just become a tool for richer nations?
That's a really good question. And I think that's where the real value added of the UN and global governance of AI is to make sure that countries globally have access to AI tools and can also develop them in an autonomous way. When you think about AI development, there's three things that you need. Typically, it's talent, data, and compute. So you need to make sure that countries can really develop their own AI talent, but also retain them. And that's where you're going to need to also have data and compute so that you can make sure that people can stay and can develop really interesting tools. And so computational power is also really important to develop. And then countries need to think about collecting and owning their own data sets. So all those different things are really important. I think that one avenue is to start looking at AI ecosystems that already exist in the global south and seeing what they need and really supporting them in their growth. The first entry point would be to bolster maybe regional hubs and help them to consolidate and solidify. And if we put more resources into really allowing regional hubs and local communities to harness AI tools to support their adaptation and mitigation of climate change, it's going to help. And so I do think that the conversation at a global level needs to focus even more on climate change. And since we have so much attention right now on AI, we kind of need to shift, guide the AI conversation towards this. It would be a really missed opportunity if we didn't.
So how can our listeners learn more about the great work that you're doing?
So I work for UNU, and we have a lot of the materials, the research papers that we've written are on our website. So I definitely encourage you to go to the UNU Center for Policy Research website. I also have a lot of really interesting colleagues throughout the UNU system. We have 14 institutes around the world, and there's a climate institute in Bonn, EHS, that does a lot of really interesting work as well. So I'm happy to plug them.
Great. And we'll put a link to that in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Great. It was my pleasure.
Okay, that was Eleonore Fournier-Tombs giving us a tour de force on some of the opportunities, but also the dangers of AI for climate action. We've heard what the UN is doing in this space, as well as some fascinating specific uses, like predicting migration caused by climate change before it occurs. And with our previous guest, Himanshu Gupta, we heard about the different types of AI and how it's already helping farmers to grow climate-resilient crops in places like Zambia and India. From both of our guests, we can tell that AI is already reshaping the way we adapt to climate change, but at the same time, it's not a silver bullet. Running AI systems demands vast amounts of energy and water. And the data centers and servers that are popping up left, right, and center are producing tons of electronic waste.
This was revealed through a couple of very recent publications from the UN Environment Programme, and we'll put links to these in the show notes. They found that, for example, a request made through ChatGPT consumes 10 times the electricity of a standard Google search. So can we really tackle climate change with machines that produce extraordinary levels of carbon dioxide and pollution? This maybe starts to feel like we're playing a game of cards with nature, where the more cards we put down, the more we may eventually have to pick up.
Now, these two UNET publications, one of them is called AI End-to-End, and the other is called Navigating New Horizons. They don't just describe the challenges, but they also make clear and tangible recommendations on the use of AI, from establishing ways of measuring the impacts to greening the data centers using renewable energy. It's a complex topic, and there's a lot to consider, but one thing's for sure, AI is the critical technology of our age. It offers both promise and danger for the climate, and we need to act in order to decide which way it's going to go.
Okay, so that's it from us. Thank you so much to Himanshu and to Eleanor. This was our last episode of the series today. It's sad to see it end, but we really hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have. If you haven't heard the previous episodes, then do go back and listen to those. Be sure to subscribe for future episodes and let us know what you think on social media. That's it from me, Marcus Neild.
And from me, Liz Bernhardt. And thank you to our listeners for joining us as we adapt to climate change, one conversation at a time. This show is funded by the Japanese Ministry of the Environment. Richard Myron is the producer, and this has been an Earshot Strategies production.